The truth is, Arcs is obviously the best game of 2024. But, and I know you've already spotted it, there's that tiny asterisk. That asterisk, that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because this box right here is fantastic. I could go on for 30 minutes about the brilliant trick taken, the thrilling dice rolls, or the fast-paced tactical combative gameplay. But I won't. Why? Because while this single box is an excellent experience, it's not my game of the year. That's where this asterisk comes in, the Blighted Reach expansion. This colossal box is cardboard at its most indulgent. It's luxurious, over the top, and audacious. It's an ambitious vision brought to life through paper and ink. If the base game is a finely tuned, tightly designed masterclass in game design, Arcs with the Blighted Reach is sheer madness manifested into cardboard form. It's a wild and unrestrained expansion that redefines the game in ways you wouldn't expect. That's my game of the year, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. What is the Blighted Reach? It can be tough to summarize the Blighted Reach, so I'll give you an analogy. The base game of Arcs, it's like a perfectly composed instrumental track. Clean, logical, and inviting enough to draw you in. It's elegant and smooth, and it's fairly easy to digest. The Blighted Reach expansion, though, that's the breakcore remix of the same song. The familiar piano melody is there, but it's torn apart, rearranged, and slammed with chaotic pounding drum beats. It's a wild, disorienting cacophony of noise and rhythm, like being thrown into a schizophrenic nightmare. But if you look closely enough, there's a sense of structure to the madness. The additions take a core that is extremely strong, and then layer on this amazing story and a symmetry that is both equal parts madness and genius. The Blighted Reach doesn't just add more stuff like a typical expansion. It completely redefines what the game of Arcs is. So yeah, the base game, the one the developers want you to play first, is all the core mechanics. It's the dice rolls, the court cards, the trick taken. It's everything you need to learn to play. While I wouldn't say it's an easy game, it sits squarely in about level 5 out of 10 complexity. Then after 3 or 4 games of vanilla Arcs, you can start incorporating the leaders and lore expansion. This adds characters with unique abilities that add pretty neat player asymmetry into the game. You can mix and match these leader cards with the various lore cards to make a nice little unique player build that you can then experiment with. And since you already have a strong understanding of the game, it's easy to dive right in. It doesn't increase the complexity too much. So it's about a 6 out of 10 level of complexity now. Now here's where it gets dicey. For most people, this form of Arcs is already the sweet spot. You can play hundreds of games of Arcs with leaders and lore and have a fantastic time. But then there's us, the obsessive ones, the ones who crave more, the ones drawn to the insanity that is the Blighted Reach. The Blighted Reach is a 3-act mini-campaign game. You'll play 3 games of Arcs with the same people back to back until one of you is crowned the winner. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The Blighted Reach cranks up that complexity dial to about 9 out of 10. It explodes your decision space, bends your fragile little gamer brain until all you can whisper is asymmetry. It is a giant, messy, 10 to 16 hour excursion that will push the limits of what a board game should be, and I goddamn love it for that. So I wanted to discuss the 3 key aspects that makes Arcs and the Blighted Reach my game of the year. And also talk about a few reasons that it might not be your game of the year, which is totally cool. Act 1, embrace the mess. Look, the truth is that you need to come to terms with the mess of it all. The Blighted Reach can get pretty gnarly, and at times can make you feel like an illiterate fool trying to keep up. There's just so much weirdness, from the bizarre fate abilities and player objectives to the multiple political factions that can be at play, and the huge variety of events. All of this is left out of the rulebook and thrown at you as you go, creating an unpredictable and constantly evolving mess of things happening around you. Blighted Reach challenges you to grapple with how its mechanics interact. The rulebook covers the basics, but there's no hand-holding with the 24 fates and their unique functions and rules. You'll need to stumble through and learn as you play. But that's part of the fun. It's a complex mess that eventually clicks into place, slowly revealing the brilliance behind the chaos. The scope of it all is purely obscene. Over the course of 3 games, there's so much variety, so many things going on, and so many potential pathways that sometimes you'll just need to absorb the mess and sit back and enjoy the ride. This also means that mistakes will happen. A lot of rules can be confusing. Things like the council, call to order, negotiation actions, event cards, edicts, summits in general, the first regent and outlaws. It can all seem muddled when you read the rulebook or watch how to play. But once you're actually playing, it does start to click. Some other aspects like the blight and the free people, they're easier to grasp, but they still add another additional layer of mental weight. Top all of this off with the extreme rule breaking that each fate can introduce. All of the exceptions, all of the one-off cases. It takes actual patience to think through the interactions that each player can do, and then find out what it means in a given scenario. I know I've made errors, but I needed to sit down, focus, and process it all. But in time, a great thing started to happen. The mess became art. That's the beauty of it. This constantly evolving monstrosity of a game expands into every nook and crevice of your psyche. Very few games are able to completely take hold of my thoughts like the Blighted Reach did. And after every game, all I wanted to do was dive back in and explore this cardboard monster in a new way. The Blighted Reach takes a game that is understandable, tight, focused, then adds so much mess that sometimes it's hard to see what's really going on. It's challenging in a way that is divisive, but this messiness is exactly what lets you see the game in a new light every time you play. It opens up and allows you to explore the game in a way that you might have not thought was possible. It's an evolving, complex work that takes a level of patience to cut through and see that brilliance behind the fussiness. So yeah, the mess is the first aspect of why it's so good. And let's keep going. Act 2, the narrative. Storytelling in games is often undervalued. In games like Brass or Dune Imperium, the narrative is often secondary and more of a flavor than a driving force. But some other games, though, aim to make memories through a story. Games like Twilight Imperium or War of the Ring are designed to create moments where there's a narrative fork in the road, and how a decision you make will shape the story being told. Arcs, the base game, is more like the former. Yes, there's personality in these leaders and lore, but being the rebel isn't about leading a rebellion. Or when you play as the overseer, you definitely feel oppressive, but it never feels like there's a narrative to your horribleness. It's a consequence of wanting a tight game, but still trying to incorporate a decent amount of asymmetry. There's just not much of a story being told. On the other hand, the Blighted Reach, though, is much like the latter. It has that added benefit of a longer playtime, about 8 hours more than a typical game, but it uses this time to create a journey for each of your faction, called fates. Each fate is immensely unique and asymmetrical, and the beauty of this system is that it truly does feel like an evolving story. For example, in a recent game, I was the advocate in Act 1, but I failed my mission and was unable to prove myself to the guild overseers. In my anguish, I had to change my fate in Act 2 and take the role of a pirate. So I gathered my forces, boarded my flagship, and pillaged all my rivals. From that success, I went on to the third act as a formidable pirate, but now I needed to hide my treasure with a secret map, only providing hints when absolutely necessary to all of my rivals of where I hid everything in one piece. Even when a fate is unsuccessful, you still feel that ripple effect. Take the Magnet, for example. They have a brutally difficult mission in Act 2, but the monopolies created still persist even after they fail in Act 3. Or the Believer, if they don't make it through Act 1, their cards still exist in the action deck, an ever-present reminder of their failure. In other words, there are consequences to decisions, and to failures or to success, which is key to creating a memorable story. Plus, the 3-act structure is practically perfect for storytelling. By the time everyone reaches that third act, there is legitimate interest and genuine care about seeing how their fate unfolds. With 24 fates, 8 available for each act, there exists a mind-numbingly large permutations of what fates might exist throughout the 3 acts of any campaign. The sheer variety of stories that can be told is functionally endless. It's an honest design miracle that everything holds together and creates a real feeling of narrative, the real weight to decisions. It forms a shared journey that people are eager to see unfold, and is an excellent vehicle for a memorable experience. Act 3. Immensely engaging for 12 plus hours. Like I said earlier, the Blighted Reach builds on arcs at its core. Even though the box for the Blighted Reach is about 4 times as large, the beef and potatoes of this buffet is still the fast-paced, tense, aggressive game that Arcs masterfully crafted. With this, the fundamentals of the Blighted Reach is still a ruthless and deep knife fight, but the pace slows down enough to allow for a more deliberate sense of narrative. The Blighted Reach introduces a ton of new game mechanisms meant to enable people to explore their fate. For example, at the very start of the game, everyone is sectioned off into one corner of the galaxy. And in a normal game, this would be absolute chaos. But here, players are prevented from attacking one another through the watchful eyes of the Imperial ships. This gives a bit of breathing room for people to set a plan into motion. Likewise, not all combat will be directed at players themselves. The titular Blight is a tough opponent that can wreak mayhem if left unchecked, and it creates a mutual enemy for most fates to have to contend with. It isn't until later into the first act that players really start to throw daggers at one another, and by this point the game board has fully evolved into a complex state of Imperial ships, player units, free cities, and Blight. As ambitions become set, the tensions ramp up, and what was once a slow burn explodes into an all-out bloodbath, with massive swings and threats from all sides. While the pace may be slower than the base game, the constant risk of losing everything and the pressure to achieve your fate's goal leads to a highly engaging struggle for control that lasts for hours and hours. And look, there's only so much I can say, but time itself is valuable, and if I'm going to have myself and 3 other people sit in a room for potentially 12 plus hours, that interaction has to be meaningful. The Blighted Reach delivers on all that great moment-to-moment gameplay you find in the base arcs, but then amplifies the story, the tension, and all of the sheer volume of content. Thanks to that ingenious fate system, every decision feels impactful, and the growing tension just adds to the player's interactions. It's an experience that rivals some of the best moments I've ever had in games. Now let's talk about some cons. I would say there's really 3 main cons that I would like to touch base with you before I conclude. 1. Arcs plus leaders and lore versus arcs plus Blighted Reach. In a weird way, we need to differentiate the forms of arcs into 2 different games. Arcs and its mini expansion of leaders and lores does feel substantially different than Arcs and the Blighted Reach. Unlike your typical expansion like TI4 and Prophecy of Kings, where new stuff is added, new mechanics, new units, and new content, but the essence of the game remains the same. The Blighted Reach changes the very nature of the experience. There's a new level of diplomacy, a new level of asymmetry, but at the cost of time and complexity. It's not really fair to assume that if someone likes arcs, they will automatically like the Blighted Reach, and vice versa. While both games share the same core mechanics, once you sit down at the table with 3 other people, you'll realize how different these 2 excellent games are. And I've touched on this in another video I made, but the base game of Arcs really is the Blighted Reach with everything extra stripped away. It's the game at its absolute simplest. The Blighted Reach is on the other extreme though. It's everything you could mechanically hope to add onto the base game. There are 2 sides of the spectrum of game design, where one is tight, controlled, fast, and the other is messy, lengthy, and paced for a deeper narrative. Ultimately, it comes down to a matter of preference. I know which form of Arcs I enjoyed more, but I can completely understand if people prefer the snappy 2-hour version over the often convoluted 12-hour version. Point number 2, kingmaking is still a thing. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the designer of Root isn't afraid of kingmaking in his games, and Arcs is no different. While I think kingmaking is toned down in Arcs compared to Root, there is still a very noticeable presence, and it can be frustrating to some people. For example, in a recent campaign, we were on the final chapter in Act 3, when a Vox card crisis activated, Populist Demands. This led to the highest ambition marker to be reset, and the very next turn, the next player had a chance to declare for 2 different ambitions. The thing is, it was so late in the game and our forces had been so wiped, it was starting to become known what the path of victory was for each player. That player who had to choose and declare an ambition had the opportunity to pick between 2 different ones. And it was obvious that selecting either one would practically ensure a win for 2 different players. Likewise, if they picked no ambition, a third player might have taken the lead. None of these paths seemed to lead to their own victory, but in the end they picked the more friendly rival, and that player ended up winning the whole campaign thanks to that final ambition marker. This isn't inherently bad game design, but it can lead to some bitterness among certain types of players. It can feel like the outcome was ultimately decided by one player making someone king. The experience as a whole was still narratively satisfying, and the moment to moment was still enthralling, but I can see why people might find this form of king making or king slaying to be a bit frustrating. It's a divisive aspect of game design that I would love to hear your opinion on. Con number 3, component issues. While not a major critique, there are some component related issues in Arcs and the Blighted Reach which I did find a bit annoying. I'll give 3 really quick examples. First, multiple people, myself included, has noticed that the board is strangely warped. Maybe not warped, but it just doesn't sit right on the table. I've had this board out for well over 100 hours and it just isn't properly resting. I might just have to put a book on it or something, but this is actually fairly unusual from high quality game design companies. Second, some pieces were just flat out damaged when I opened the box. Like, take a look at this ship. It's as if it was built in a system controlled by your opponent. It doesn't affect the gameplay, but I am a little worried about quality control when I don't usually see this kind of stuff. I've started using the plastic pieces exclusively, but I just feel like I need to mention this. Third, there's a few erratas and misprints in the Blighted Reach that just feel a bit weird. One card for the Steward is just a complete misprint. Another card that we had problems with was Guild Loyalty, which is a lore card that mentions you do not bury guild cards, which led to a brief discussion and a rulebook confusion about what happens when outrage actually occurs. We also encountered the term blockaded from our boys at Twilight Imperium. It only appears once on one lore card, but it was still enough for us to be like, I don't remember seeing this in the Arcs rulebook. Now, I know it's a complex new game, so I expect some erratas and fixes and quality control issues, but I just feel like I have to mention these things for the sake of my own sanity. They don't really ruin the experience for me, but there were brief moments of frustration, and if you don't realize these erratas exist at all, you might be legitimately confused with some of these cards. Conclusion. Arcs and the Blighted Reach are both brilliant games, and both absolutely deserve Game of the Year. The thing is, I do see them as 2 distinct and unique experiences, independent of one another. There are people I know who would be more inclined just to play Arcs and Leaders in Lore, and other people who would be super down to play Blighted Reach. And the thing is, I'm a Blighted Reach kind of boy. I love that long shared experience, the journey, the narrative, the tension, and exploring that mess. It's all so good and so well designed, and it took a fair bit of actual work to get a hang of the game and to understand the mechanics and everything that the Blighted Reach incorporates. But it does have a certain acquired taste that you get, which just makes it a bit hard to go back to the base Arcs. Truthfully, I have a strong admiration for the Blighted Reach's ambition and design. It is clear that there is a powerful vision, and the team behind it had the resources and dedication to bring it to life. It isn't very often that something as large and as impactful comes out, and I think if you're looking for something to eat away at your mind instead of doom scrolling your nights away, give Arcs and the Blighted Reach a go. In conclusion, Arcs the base game is 8.5 out of 10. With Leaders and Lore, it's 9 out of 10. The Blighted Reach is a thunderous 9.8 out of 10, and my Game of the Year for 2024. Thank you for watching, as always, and bye.